Here's some strong winds developing as well. But elsewhere across the bulk of England and Wales, it'll be another dry night, variable amounts of cloud and a warm and muggy night to come, particularly in the south where we can see lows just falling to 19 or 20 degrees, a little bit cooler further towards the north. As we look into Friday then, you can see that heavy rain still affecting much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, continuing for much of the day, slowly pushing its way southwards as we head through the day. But elsewhere across England and Wales, look at this, fine, dry, plenty of sunshine, and with those southerly winds that I mentioned, temperatures really will lift. So probably the peak of the heat, like I said, we could see widely temperatures across England and Wales into the low 30s, but in the southeast corner, 33 or 34 degrees, quite exceptional for the time of the year. Once again, cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we head through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight. That cold front will slowly sink its way southwards, affecting Northern England, Northern Wales by the end of the night. To the north of it, it will be cooler and fresher, but again, another warm, muggy night across England and Wales. Quite uncomfortable for sleeping, I think. Gradually, it will turn more unsettled as we head into the weekend. We will see a thundery breakdown across much of England and Wales. That will clear and will turn fresher for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan. For the next hour, we're talking about that Bank of England interest rate rise, with the base interest rate up by 0.25% to 1.25%. Rates are rising, but is it enough to seriously tackle inflation? Should the Bank of England have done more? Plus, we look at the impact of Nottingham Forest's promotion to the Premier League on the economic fortunes of that proud East Midlands city. And we dig into the reality of making batteries for electric cars with someone who really knows. On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 1 minute past 1, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government has published the resignation letter from Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor and the Prime Minister's response. Lord Geidt, who left his position suddenly yesterday, says he was asked to consider measures that risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code, which he said he could play no part in. Boris Johnson's called Lord Geidt's resignation a surprise. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab told GB News he was also surprised to hear of the resignation.
There's also the fact that he was talking to Number 10 just this week about an extension for 6 months. So I was surprised to hear the news, and I know there was a specific issue which is commercially sensitive, so I'm limited in what I can say, that he was asked to look at, and in the national interest. And again, I don't know whether it was related to that. I think we'll hear more today. Number 10 will give a further update.
The Bank of England has said the Consumer Prices Index is now expected to reach above 11% in October. It's after the rate of inflation increased from 1% to 1.25% as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the highest level since January 2009 and the fifth consecutive rise in interest rates. GDP fell by 0.3% in April, which economists predicted would rule out anything more than a small rise. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the US after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. Mr. Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. The Transport Secretary says next week's rail strikes are an incredible act of self-harm. Grant Shapps says they're designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time, and he says they're an attempt to derail critical reforms. Unions have described the national rail strikes over pay, jobs and conditions as the biggest in history. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill. It aims to redress the balance between landlords and privately renting households across England. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says there needs to be more building of homes across the country.
It doesn't really matter if we're building social homes or market rate homes. We need to build all of these sorts of homes, and we need to the government needs to stop sort of applying sticking plaster after sticking plaster and actually tackle the root of this problem, which is supply.
Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try and improve conviction rates for sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. More than 200 people reached the UK on the coast of Kent yesterday. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed 233 people arrived at UK shores on half a dozen boats. That doesn't include a further 38 who were brought ashore by a lifeboat at Dungeness overnight. A GB News producer has said at least 80 people have been picked up in 2 small boats today. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Liam with On the Money.
And coming up on The Money today, the Bank of England has made its move, but is it enough? Yes, that quarter-point rise in interest rates to 1.25% will make variable rate mortgages and other borrowing more expensive for households and firms. But will it be enough to bear down on double-digit UK inflation? Should the bank have done more? We hold a detailed discussion. And Michael Gove's today unveiled some of the biggest proposed changes in housing policy in over 30 years. Reform aimed at helping tenants and landlords alike. And with 4 million households in private rented accommodation across England alone, these proposals won't go unnoticed. Plus, each day on The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview, of course. Well, today we meet James Quinn of Faradian, one of the world's leading battery technology companies based in Sheffield. We'll be hearing how the UK could soon overtake China as the world's leading battery innovation hub. and how Faradian and its investors plan to bring large economic growth and jobs to the northeast. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money. So the Bank of England raised interest rates this lunchtime by 0.25%. That is 0.25%. It's the fifth rise in as many months. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee, or MPC, have been raising rates in a bid to rein in inflation, attempting to put a lid on some of the price rises which are behind this cost of living crisis. Inflation in the UK is high. The headline Consumer Price Index in April was 9% up on the same month last year, more than 4 times the Bank of England's 2% target. The alternative Retail Price Index inflation measure was 11.1% already. And the Producer Price Index, a measure of price rises faced by firms, showed inflation at no less than 18.6%. Back in December, the base interest rate was 0.1%. The bank has since raised rates at 5 monthly meetings in a row to 1.25% today. That's the highest since February 2009. And the question isn't whether the MPC should have raised rates today, because that was always a given, but whether they should have gone up more. The bank now expects CPI inflation to reach 11% in October, up from its previous 10% forecast, which I personally think is still an underestimate. Yet after the Federal Reserve raised US interest rates by 0.75%, many thought the bank would have grasped the nettle today and gone for at least a 0.5% increase. But they didn't. And it strikes me the MPC has once again dropped the ball, failing to really assert itself as it strives to contain inflation. And that's our On the Money question today. Should the Bank of England have raised interest rates by more? Grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. That's what we do here on The Money. And on cue, we have 2 returning regulars. Catherine McBride, she is fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, and he's backed by popular demand in the studio, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Regionally. Great to have you both with us. Catherine, should the Bank of England have done more?
Well, I think because the Fed funds had raised by 3/4 of a point the day before, they certainly had the leeway to do that. And as we've talked earlier about the dollar against the pound, it's now down to 1.21. So that'll kind of help some industry who are trying to export, but it's for a lot of what the UK does. A lot of our service industries won't be happy about that. A lot of our investment funds won't be happy about that. So I think that they should have, yes, because everyone kind of knows in August, their next meeting, 4th of August, they'll do it again. And so it's like, well, why not do it? And the Fed said that they expect rates to be 3% by the end of the year. So they're on a track.
They're on a tear.
So I don't know.
Let's just unpack what you said so everyone listening and watching can follow. What you're saying, Catherine, is that because the Bank of England has raised interest rates now by less than the Federal Reserve, that means the dollar will strengthen against the pound will weaken, the dollar's relatively more attractive given those higher interest rates. A weaker pound, Justin, and we've seen the pound fall in the last hour or so after this Bank of England decision. That will, of course, make imports more expensive, pushing up inflation, pushing up prices in the shops, pushing up prices of imported components for our firms. And what Catherine's saying, Justin, and do you agree with her or not, that the Bank of England should have just gone for it and gone for at least a half-point hike in interest rates?
Look at what the Bank of England's done over the past few months and the statements they've been putting out, and they've been seen to be coming over as being pretty weak, wussy. And here was an opportunity to actually sit there and say, as Catherine was saying, right, we've seen that big rise yesterday from the Fed, we could come up with something pretty strong and said, right, here's the message, this is important stuff, we're taking this seriously. There isn't a direct line of causation between interest rates and inflation. It sort of indirectly hits inflation, particularly this sort of inflation, which, of course, is being impacted because of the war and other issues.
Food and fuel prices.
All of those elements, whereas, say, inflation back in the 70s was being directly affected by expenditure and retail expenditure, especially.
And big wage hikes because of lots of trade unions.
So it's slightly different this time round. So you could put those interest rates up now, be seen to be having that impact, but also the other side of it, actually then making sure that there's reason for the economy to be growing. Where is the incentives to actually see those areas of the economy where we know there are positive elements? You're covering one today with regard to batteries, where we could actually see there's something which is actually requiring new innovation, new investment, and that's what the story we should be trying to actually push more, because all this does at the moment, I'm afraid, is get rid of that vital word, which is confidence.
Well, so what we have here in the studio are, you are both, with all respect, you're all fabulous analysts, you're both inflation hawks. You both want to see faster interest rate rises to really bear down on inflation, because in the view of both of you, inflation is a worse evil than a slowdown, right? So, and you know I'm pretty hawkish too. I write it all the time, my Telegraph column and so on. But just for the sake of conversation, and because there will be listeners and viewers thinking, hang about, my mortgage is going to get a lot more expensive. Hang about, my personal loans are going to get a lot more expensive. We have just had 2 successive months, preliminary data at least, of falling GDP in March and April. The UK economy is clearly weak, Catherine. So won't the Bank of England's, it was a 6-3 vote, so 6 out of the 9 economists voted for 0.25%, 3 voted for 0.5%. That's what we think the minutes, we're just slightly, they're not fully published, but reading between the lines, we think that's what happened. So isn't there some sense, at least, in just going for a 1/4 point interest rate rise? Interest rates are still going up. It's not as if the Bank of England's completely bottled it.
Well, it'll also depend on how it gets translated into the community, because I think not that many people still have variable interest rates on their mortgages.
It's about 2 million of about 8 million mortgages, so it's a lot less than it used to be.
Well, it's more than I expected, actually, because there have been so many deals and we've had such long interest rates, low interest rates for such a long time. I would have thought
everyone's fixed, right?
Anyone with a... I mean, I suppose the younger generation might have thought these rates were lasting forever, but anyone older than 30 probably knew that wasn't going to happen and was fixing them. It does also give the bigger investors who are a bigger part of this, the big hedge funds, the big funds that invest in bonds and government bonds, should hopefully be moving money in that direction. And maybe banks might even pass it on to saving people, you know, and give people an alternative investment, because right now there isn't really one. So people have been in stocks and they have been in property and they have been in things like that. So, so I'm not so sure about how much it goes into the variable rate mortgages. But if it's 2 million people, then I'm probably wrong on that.
It's a lot less than it was. It's still chunky. I mean, this interest rate rise will slow down the economy. It won't slow it down as much as a 50 basis point, a 0.5% point rise would, you'd think, Justin. Let me just ask you, though, about sterling. It's something we've talked about a lot here on GB News, here on The Money, about the pound. The pound has lost a lot of ground. It's gone from about $1.25 to $1.20, $1.21 over the last month or so. Of course, a weaker pound makes all our imports more expensive. We import a lot in this country. Particularly we import fuel, which is priced in dollars. How important do you think sterling is in solving this inflation conundrum? Because if the Bank of England keeps raising rates by less than the other major central banks, the pound will get weaker. Inflation will go up because of that.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that's a given. You will see more of that coming in. Now, put it in perspective. Go back to Brexit votes. We were at 150 to the dollar.
Yeah.
We've been between 120, 150. So we're at the lower end of that scale. So we're not exceptionally out of that. But now we could actually find ourselves.
It was 150 on the vote because it kind of became a one-way bet. It was like 138, 140 in the sort of 6 months before or
that.
the Brexit
I
vote.
would do
So
that.
it's been bouncing around that sort of. So we haven't gone below 120 yet. I wouldn't be too surprised if it did.
We haven't been below 120 since 1985.
That's a long,
right?
long time on that. But it's you see this occurring now, and you think, well, hang on a second. Sterling actually internationally isn't that important anymore. You know, you actually see where does in times of fear, where does money go? Goes to the dollar. Goes to the dollar. Therefore, sterling gets weaker.
But the Swiss franc isn't as important. But if you're a good investment, you're a good investment. If we've got companies here in the UK that people want to invest in, they demand pounds. If we're an attractive or well-run economy, in particular, well-run economy with stable politics and a good legal system, people invest in sterling assets. They need the pound to do that.
And a few years ago, we actually found ourselves in that sort of position. Unfortunately, at the moment, we find ourselves with leadership. Well, leadership.
So would you have gone 0.75% today, Catherine, if you were on the NPC? And, of course, it's only a matter of time.
Well, I hope. But
quality.
I would just like to say that the foreign and direct investment has actually been quite high.
It has.
We had higher foreign direct investment than any other
As Boris
country in
Johnson
Europe.
pointed out in the Commons yesterday, didn't he?
Yeah.
There has been lots of
So
foreign
that
direct
people
investment.
are
And people
bringing-
need pounds to do that foreign direct investment
exactly.
in the UK.
Yes, and they see us as a well-run place to put money, and it will be in pounds if they buy a company here. But that's the other side of it. While you know, everyone's thinking about the man in the street, but businesses are the people who are most likely to be affected by variable interest rates. Businesses are not like mortgages. They do not get a fixed rate.
That's right.
And that is the thing we really have. If we want to grow our way out of this conundrum, we need to encourage more business in the UK. That does mean more foreign direct investment, but it also means encouraging British people to start businesses. And if, you know, so a steady interest rate or knowing where the interest rate is makes that easier. So rather than every month, will they increase a little bit, a little bit, just
Do
go
it.
there.
Do it.
Do that. Yeah, that's what
It's been one of our successes, actually starting up new businesses. We've been really good at that. One of our failures is actually financing businesses. We start them up, but actually going from small to growing, we're useless at. That's the bit we need to
It was ever thus. If only we were in charge, us three. What a monetary policy committee we would make. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, Catherine McBride, thanks so much for your input to that discussion. Let's cross over now to Houghton Le Spring in Sunderland. Talking of the man and woman in the street, where our North of England reporter Rachel Sweeney is getting reaction from local people on this interest rate rise. Hi, Rachel. What are people saying in your part of the world about the Bank of England's latest move?
Hi, Liam. Well, I've been here all morning with the parents at Woodland Play Patch in Houghton Le Spring, and they were expecting a rise in interest rates, but not quite by this much. It's obviously going to affect businesses, as you've been saying. Let's go straight to the owner, Sophie Williams. Sophie, what is your reaction?
This is just another blow to everybody, I think. We're coming off the back of COVID. People are already, struggling from that. There's a lot of other things going on at the moment, and I think the government needs to be stepping in and doing more. I know they've done some of the grants, but that's just not enough. That was just a token gesture to look like something's happening, and it's going to need to be more done.
We have a family here with 5 children, 3 identical twins. Your family situation is very rare, but this is something that everybody's feeling, isn't it? Now, how is this going to affect you, these interest rates, with mortgages and other payments?
Well, I think it's me, daughter. She's gone from having 2 children to 5 children, and just everything is cost astronomical, and it's really scary time for everybody.
Amy, the government has offered grants to families. Is that enough? What do you think?
It's just a drop in the ocean for us. We're a family of 7, and the cost of the childcare, like a food shop, paying petrol in the car, it's an awful lot, and it's just such a struggle for us, and it's obviously such a worrying time.
With interest rates going up, mortgage repayments going up, what changes will you have to make?
We're just going to have to cut down. We're going to have to not travel as far. We're going to have to do local walks, find different ways that we can entertain the children nearby. Could obviously be careful what we're spending at the shops. We're going to have to just have a look at our lifestyle.
Now, it's very rare to have 3 identical triplets, but unfortunately their situation is anything but. We're seeing it more and more again. That's it from Houghton Le Spring.
Great to hear from you, Rachel, and to see those lovely little babies in the arms. Wonderful section there. Of course, these Bank of England interest rate rises, I personally think they should have gone up more. But, of course, even this quarter-point rise does impose real pain on households and firms. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be discussing what's called the biggest change to the law for tenants in a generation, after Michael Gove set out his rental reforms this morning. That's from my expert panel and the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. It's 1:23. You're On the Money here on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio and online. Now, Minister Eddie Hughes has today unveiled some of the biggest proposed changes in housing policy in over 30 years. The rental reform white paper includes plans to scrap no-fault evictions, which allowed landlords to serve evictions on tenants with just 2 months' notice for any reason. Plus, as currently applied to social housing, rental homes will have to pass a certain standard before being available to potential tenants. And renters will have more rights to have pets in their properties too. Some reforms would benefit landlords as well, including insurance to cover any damage to properties. Now, there are around 4 million households in private rented accommodation across England, a huge expansion over the last 20 years. And as rental costs spiral, there's been growing concern about the affordability of such accommodation. Our London reporter, Alice Porter, joins us live from Westminster. Alice, what's the political mood around these rental reforms? Clearly, the government wants to appeal to generation rent, to people, frankly, of your generation who are having to rent, who can't afford their own home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a paper that is very much playing to the crowds for a lot of people who are in rental accommodation across the country. I mean, let's take the point that you were saying there about no-fault eviction. I mean, and this is an issue that Shelter, the housing charity, estimate affects 300,000 people across the country over the last few years. And so I think it gives you a scale there of how many people who've been affected by it. What it means for people who don't know, it means a landlord or a landlady can give you an eviction notice with no reason, and you have effectively 2 months to get out of the property. And that's been heavily criticised by a number of charities who've really welcomed the move of today from the government, although some say it's long overdue because this was something Theresa May was talking about back in 2019. So I think that's probably the most most important point of this paper. But the second is the government's commitment to raise the standard of private sector accommodation. A lot of people, myself included, have had terrible situations with poor quality rental accommodation, and what the government is doing is applying the decent home standard, which we have in social housing. They want to extend it to the private sector as well, so that there is a minimum standard in play. They also, as you were saying, they want to make it easier for people to have their dogs or cats in their flats as well if they're renting. So a lot of good news there for tenants. In terms of what this means for landlords, it's interesting because a lot of landlords have been reacting and blaming the government for a shortage of supply at a very time when there's record levels of demand, and it's led to a lot of landlords leaving the sector, and that's in turn is putting the rental prices up. And I think it's important to stress that whilst these are some really interesting initiatives we're seeing in the white paper today, at the backdrop of all of this is we've got a housing crisis and a housing shortage. So we have the government who's pledged to build 300,000 homes a year. They're not on target to do that. And I think that does make it very problematic when looking at the white paper that will be published later today.
Nice summing up there, Alice. Alice Porter, GB News London reporter from Westminster, talking about this new white paper. Now, a white paper of proposals that the government's putting forward. It's not yet legislation, but it does indicate where the government wants to go with its legislation. Let's hear now from Ben Beadle. He's the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association. Ben, good to have you on the show. We very often have here on The Money young people who are renting and not so young people with families who are renting. There is concern about how some landlords treat their tenants. Isn't it right that Michael Gove, Eddie Hughes, other ministers in the department are trying to put forward policies to protect our growing number of private tenants?
Good to see you again. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we certainly don't rail or rally against the plans to improve standards in the sector. We all want decent and safe homes, and those homes that are damp or have a Category 1 hazard need to be improved. It's as simple as that. But it's worth reminding ourselves, I think, Liam, that 79% of the PRS already meets the decent home standard. So we're dealing with a relatively small percentage. But the backdrop to this is that isn't dealt with in the white paper, actually, is the point that Alice raised, which is, and we've discussed it many times, the supply of homes. I think what a lot of landlords will see in the white paper itself is they may well be fearful about the direction of travel, and I don't think that bodes well for the supply crisis that we are in the middle of.
Ben, let's just drill down a little bit. We're both digesting the white paper still. It's quite a hefty document, as these policy papers often are. Let's talk a little bit about these no-fault evictions that allow a landlord to get rid of a tenant, for want of a better phrase, in 2 months with no reason. If those end, how will that impact landlords? Because, of course, a lot of landlords, they're just people with one buy-to-let property because they haven't got a pension for whatever reason. It's not as if all landlords are sort of massive oligarchs with huge property portfolios, is it?
No, exactly right. And that is exactly the mantra that we very much believe in. I think what I would say on no-fault evictions is just because the landlord doesn't have to give a reason doesn't mean there isn't one. And I think often there is one. And the reason why landlords are using no fault is because we have a broken court system that means it can take upwards of 12 months to get possession of your property back. What we hope that the white paper will do, and it does set it out, is that in return for the abolition of Section 21, we will see strengthened Section 8 grounds that mean landlords can get possession of their property for a legitimate reason: significant rent arrears, persistent rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, wishing to sell, moving back in. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. And we must also bear in mind that actually government's own figures show that 8% of tenancies are actually are only ended by the landlord. 92% are ended by tenants of their own volition. So with the right sort of checks and balances here, we think it can work. But I think what might spook landlords a little bit is that the assured short-hold tenancy and the assured tenancy is being replaced by a periodic tenancy, which means you essentially start a tenancy on a rolling basis, and tenants will be able to give 2 months' notice at any time. That will disrupt the market a little bit, we think.
I've stressed a couple of times, and it's worth repeating, these aren't actual changes, these are proposed changes. We have to convert a white paper into legislation. That legislation has to get through the Commons and the Lords, etc., etc. What do you think of the direction of travel in terms of these proposals as they go into law? Do you think they'll get stronger from a tenant's perspective, or, with all respect, do you think they'll get weaker? Landlords can be a pretty influential bunch.
Well, we certainly want to see a fair environment for landlords, that's for sure. We don't think it's unreasonable that landlords should be able to deal with antisocial behaviour, and we don't think that paying rent is an optional extra, and we are very, very keen to see that reflected in the final legislation. But Gove and Eddie Hughes have set out a 12-point plan for their white paper. So it's not just about Section 21 and repossessions. It's about a housing ombudsman to resolve disputes between landlords and tenants. It's about empowering tenants to ask their landlords to keep a pet where the landlord has the ultimate veto, and a whole range of other things that I'm sure we will get round to discussing on a future show. But it certainly sets out an interesting direction of travel, that's for sure.
Ben Beadle of the National Residential Landlords Association, good to have you on the show as ever. We're going to be hearing after the break from my panel here in the studio, Catherine Bride and indeed Justin Urquhart-Stewart. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Also after the break, today's Money Talks interview with Faradian, one of the world's leading battery technology companies based in Sheffield, Yorkshire. So stay with us after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government has published the resignation letter from Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor and the Prime Minister's response. Lord Geidt, who left his position suddenly yesterday, says he was asked to consider measures that risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. Downing Street says Boris Johnson suggested there's no plan to wait for a new advisor before going ahead with the controversial plan Lord Geidt quit over. The Bank of England has increased UK interest rates from 1% to 1.25% as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the fifth consecutive rise, pushing them to the highest level in 13 years. The bank says the Consumer Prices Index is now expected to reach above 11% by October. The Transport Secretary says next week's rail strikes are an incredible act of self-harm. Grant Shapps says they're designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time, and he says they're an attempt to derail critical reforms. Unions have described the national rail strikes over pay, jobs and conditions as the biggest in history. And Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the US after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyers told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. More than 200 people reached the coast of Kent in small boats yesterday. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed 233 people arrived at UK shores on half a dozen boats. That doesn't include a further 38 who were brought ashore by a lifeboat at Dungeness overnight. A GB News producer has said at least 80 people have been picked up in 2 small boats today. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.214 to the dollar. It's 1.168 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,503 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. It's 1:37. Before we move on with the show, let's just go back to my expert panel of regulars. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Regionally, and indeed Catherine McBride of the Centre for Brexit Policy. We just heard, Catherine, from the National Residential Landlords Association about these proposals from Michael Gove and indeed the Minister of State, Eddie Hughes, on rental reform. Is this real? Is it a gimmick?
No, I think it's there, but I do think that Eddie Hughes made a very good point that only 8% of tenancies, which is in their press release, are actually broken by the landlord against the wishes of the tenant. So
less than 1 in 10.
Yeah, and it's
and of course, plenty of landlords put up with unpaid rent and tenants who, quite frankly, behave disgracefully.
Well, exactly, and but the ombudsman idea is a very good one, that they can quickly resolve disputes between landlords and tenants
rather than going to court.
Yeah, rather than going to court. But this is a free market problem. You know, we have so many restrictions on increasing supply, and we have, quite frankly, increased demand for housing.
Yeah, huge.
And you've just been showing us more people arriving over the channel. You know, they need to live somewhere. You know, we've lost the free market aspect of our housing, because high prices usually cure high prices, and by increasing supply
by bringing on more
and
supply,
reducing demand. And unfortunately, neither of those things are working at the moment.
Big developers, oligopoly, they don't increase supply. But that's another conversation.
Well, it depends on who buys them. You see, if they're being sold to people who don't live in the UK and don't want to rent them out, and one of the reasons they don't want to rent them out is probably what they look at
rent
it and go,
arrears and so on.
It's too hard.
What do you think of the Michael Gove's rental proposals?
Well, it strikes me still sort of tinkering with it, because certainly where, as I look in West London, an awful lot of property is empty. It's bought, they're supposed to be rented. It's not being rented out. So you're missing out on some of the key issues there. Then also look at the supply in terms of landlords. How many landlords now actually benefit from this? Because they had some very good tax breaks beforehand.
Yeah.
Might be probably slightly too generous. Yeah. But now those are gone. Actually, the benefit from what you're seeing of these, well, you sometimes wonder. So tinkering, I still haven't resolved the underlying issue. There is one underlying problem, of course, supply. There isn't enough supply.
Indeed, as Alice Porter and indeed Ben of the National Residential Landlords Association said. This time next week, Catherine, we'll be looking at a new inflation number. The inflation number for May will be coming out. What do you think it will say? Do you think the Bank of England will look to be behind the curve as the retail price index moves into double digits?
Yes, I think I've already said that. I already think they're behind the curve. But I think that there are other issues that they have to look at with the inflation. They have to look at some of the things that they are doing that keeps prices high. Obviously, some of the government taxes, they have to question why we still put tax on fuel, because that was to limit people using it. Well, I now think that prices are doing that enough without the government helping. We're still charging import duty on a hell of a lot of stuff that we have to import, that we can't make ourselves.
So it's not as if we're protecting domestic producers of certain things.
Yeah, we're pretending to.
Yeah.
And yet our domestic producers are producing to the limit. Most of the farmers in this country do not have a spare field at the back of that they have left empty, waiting for more people to keep coming across. So, if we're going to expand our population the way we are, we're going to have to import more things to supply the people who are coming in. That's pretty obvious, I think, and I don't know how we're not addressing that.
What's your final thought, Justin, on the Bank of England's move today? A 0.25% rise when a lot of people thought it would be a 0.5% rise, given that the Federal Reserve in America yesterday did a 0.7% rise.
They had an opportunity for a much more aggressive move on it, and they missed it, that one. One thing they should take account of, look, we had oil price and gas price doubling. It's unlikely to do that again.
Yeah.
So sometime later this year, that drops off the calculation.
Yeah.
So the figure goes down. So that's the one bit, to sit there and say, well, actually, a bit of this inflation will start dropping again. That's some encouraging stuff. But, well, for God's sake, will someone please tell me why, when we want more money going into corporation, we put up corporation tax?
That's going up by from 19% to 25% next year. That's on the cards.
We
That's
want
legislated.
companies to grow, not shrink.
Yes.
Surely the government's going to have to can that upcoming tax increase.
And meanwhile, they're making a lot of money.
And it's not, if you're self-employed, you're paying corporation tax, right? I mean, if you're a sole trader, you're going to pay 25% on your profits. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Justin Urquhart, Catherine McBride, as ever, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Amid some gloomy news, but great to have your commentary as ever. You're on the money here with me, Liam Halligan. Thank you to my guests today. And now football is an integral part of the British and global economy, of course. During the 2019-2020 season, the Premier League alone contributed a whopping £7.6 billion to UK commerce. That's 7,600 million quid. Proper money. That's why Nottingham Forest FC's promotion to the Premier League brings a much-needed boost to the city and the East Midlands more broadly. The city of Nottingham has faced a series of setbacks in recent years, with the pandemic and changing retail habits forcing the closure of high street shops and precincts. But now promotion for Notts Forest FC, worth an estimated £170 million to the team, brings large financial rewards to the city. Rewards which have been welcomed by business and council leaders. I'm joined now by Chris Hobson, Director of Policy and External Affairs at East Midlands Chamber of Commerce. Chris, great to have you with us. I grew up with Brian Clough, John McGovern, John Robertson, double European Cup winners, Forest. What a team that was. Ian Bowyer, Tony Woodcock, my Archie Gemmell. Are they returning to those glory days? And if they do, what will that mean for Nottingham?
Well, you know what? Hopefully we'll have some more names to add to that list soon. It's been too long, over a couple of decades now since they've been in the top tier. It is a real boost for confidence. We were talking earlier on in the show with your guest, I remember Justin talking about the importance of feeling confident and the impact that has, not just on people, but on businesses. And actually having a team in the top flight, a league that is viewed around the world, is global. You were talking about the numbers earlier, is a real boost for confidence. Just down the road from Nottingham, we have Leicester, and we've seen what a successful football team in Leicester can do for a city. And the hope is that we'll have more of that in Nottingham.
His childhood friends moved from London to Nottingham. His wife's family's from Nottingham. I visit him from time to time. It always seems to me as a really livable city. You've got Notts Forest in the middle of town by the river there. You've got Trent Bridge, of course, if you want to watch first-class cricket. You've got a great rowing scene down there. You've got 2 universities now there in Nottingham, a really vibrant place, lots of students. It seems to me like a really good place to live, but it did suffer during the pandemic, didn't it? And the high street there, the shopping centre, has suffered. Can you turn that round?
It did suffer, yeah, and there's a big redevelopment that needs to take place, something called the Broadmarsh Shopping Centre. It's really important to get that right. I was with a group of our Nottingham businesses yesterday, and one of them bought a copy of Property Week with them. And Nottingham actually, out of all of the country, has had the biggest return to the city centre in terms of recovery post-pandemic. The pandemic did hit Nottingham hard. It hit lots of cities and towns of similar sizes hard as well, but actually it is really bouncing back. And actually, so people, I don't know how people know the Nottingham economy. Manufacturing historically incredibly big, but professional services now are really growing, and lots of businesses will base themselves in Nottingham and serve the regional economy. And one of the things we've seen are some of the firms that previously might have been in London or Birmingham or Manchester, because it's cheaper, it's more affordable, and you have all the quality of life that you've spoken about. People start to locate or relocate into Nottingham. So I think that on top of the good news of the football and other things going on, I think the future is going to be really exciting.
It's obviously a very special football club. It's a kind of medium-sized giant, isn't it? With all respect, lots of Notts Forest fans won't like me saying that. It isn't one of the massive clubs, but it's a club with a massive history and a massive heart, of course. What's it meant to people living in Nottingham that Notts Forest are back in the top flight?
I mean, we're showing some of the images on the screen now. The party was massive and prolonged, and it really is fantastic for people in Nottingham. And you're right, for a long time, people have spoken about the history and 79 and 80 in the European Cups, and Nottingham Forest, as the name is known out there, but it's been away from the top league for too long. So to be back up there, to be playing, with the best teams again. And incidentally, actually, the football fixtures for the Premier League came out today. So West Ham are the first team to come up to the City Ground in August. To have those matches again, to have the likes of Chelsea, United, City, all of those big names being watched globally by millions of people, it's fantastic for Nottingham, and it'll help get it back on the map.
Chris Hobson, Director of Policy and External Affairs at East Midlands Chamber of Commerce. Great to have you with us, and best of luck to Nottingham Forest FC for the Premier League season to come. It's time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks, and I'll be joined by James Quinn. He's the Chief Executive of Faradion. That's a Sheffield-based sodium-ion battery maker. Founded by Dr. Chris Wright, Dr. Jerry Baker and Ashwin Kumaraswamy in 2011, Faradion's one of the world's leading battery technology companies. Most electric vehicles use lithium-ion batteries containing cobalt and nickel, raw materials which are expensive, scarce, and sometimes mined using child labour. The use of these batteries also makes the UK dependent on supply chains controlled sometimes by the Chinese. And so Faradion recognises the importance of sodium-ion technology as an integral part of a world beyond lithium. They've also been backed by big Indian investors, among others, bringing high-value jobs and growth to Yorkshire. So here he is, James Quinn, my latest guest on Money Talks. James, great to see you here in the studio. Tell us what sodium-ion batteries are rather than lithium-ion batteries, because I must admit, I'm sort of at the limits here. I'm a bear of little brain. I'm at the limit of my knowledge.
I think when people think of batteries, they think of something that goes in your flashlight or the lead-acid battery in your car. To give you an example, I have a sample here, a sodium-ion battery. It would look very much like a lithium-ion battery. This is a cell. It's a pouch cell. But we don't use any lithium. We don't use any cobalt. We don't use any copper. And we don't use any graphite.
Now, they're either semi-precious industrial metals or rare earth minerals, as they're called, often in quite difficult places, in China, in Africa. A lot of political risk mining them, a lot of expense.
Exactly.
You don't use those. Can I just feel it?
Yeah, please.
So I'm holding this cell. It's about the size, if I may say so, of an iPad.
Correct.
Other digital devices are available. It's less heavy than I thought it would be. So in a car, how many of these would you need?
You probably have somewhere around 1,000 cells.
Around 1,000 of those, OK.
Exactly,
That's
because
quite a
of the
lot
format.
Weight, but not as much weight, it seems to me, as a lot of electric car batteries at the moment.
Exactly. Some of the things that are very unique about sodium ion is because we don't use those expensive raw materials, it's a lower cost technology, number one. It's more sustainable technology because you're not mining it from, the lithium, for example, has gone up 5x in price per ton since 2019. And nickel is very expensive right now.
Copper's
Cobalt,
going to the moon, of
copper,
course.
exactly. So we use aluminium. We don't use any copper. But one of the unique things is we can completely discharge all of the energy out of the cell, and we can short it. So it's like shipping a bag of electrolyte instead of a battery. So for transportation, safety, and so forth, it's a very unique technology. You cannot do that with lithium because, as we know, we're all able to travel again and get on a plane. They always tell you to take out your lithium-ion batteries because under certain temperature conditions, they can become unstable. So sodium-ion doesn't have that.
So a sodium-ion battery, it may be, there's less political angst in terms of getting hold of those rare earths, less strategic issues, less dependency on parts of the world we may not want to depend on, with all due respect. Is it cheaper, apart from that, though, sodium-ion, compared to lithium-ion?
It is less expensive. About 75–80% of the cost of this cell is the materials, not the manufacturing of the cell itself. So the materials play a very important role into this. So that's definitely one aspect of it, which makes it very unique in that respect. But from a performance-wise, it performs very similar to certain kinds of lithium-ion technology, like lithium iron phosphate.
Could you say that again?
It's my Siri, sorry.
Your watch is talking to you now.
And so it provides a lot of unique advantages in that respect.
So tell us about what the plans are then in Sheffield. What kind of factory is there at the moment? What kind of factory could be there? How many people are you going to employ?
That's a great question because the original lithium-ion battery was developed not too far from here, Oxford University, lithium cobalt oxide. It's in your laptop and your phone. And that was commercialized by our co-founder and executive chairman, Chris Wright, to Sony. And that was done in the Sony camcorder. But a lot of the technology gets developed here is commercialized in other locations. And Faradian is really making the UK the center of excellence for sodium-ion technology. We've now been invested by Reliance, and Reliance is buying Boots right now. They own Hemleys in the UK. They're very heavily invested in the UK, and they're investing heavily in Faradian. In Sheffield, we're putting high-value jobs. We're building a cathode manufacturing facility in Sheffield, which is really the recipe to Coke, if you will, our secret component of it. We're building a cell manufacturing facility in Sheffield. We're building an advanced innovation center.
How big could this get for Sheffield, for the UK?
In the first stage, it's really building it up to the pilot scale to be able to really continue to innovate and advance the technology so it gets closer to, let's say, the NMC or the really high-performing lithium technology. What we're doing in parallel is we're scaling up to 50 gigawatts in India in parallel, because Reliance has probably 100 gigawatts of their own captive demand. It's a massive company, one of the largest in the world. And then that brings the cost down and then enables us to scale further and expand into other locations.
There's a lot of doom and gloom around at the moment here in the UK about our economy, but you're clearly a sophisticated international businessman with respect, and it's a very much a cutting-edge company. What's good about the UK from the perspective of an international investor like you? What's good about Sheffield?
Actually, I really like Sheffield, frankly. I grew up in New York.
Great place.
Great
nightlife in Sheffield, crikey.
Exactly. It's amusing. Johnny Depp was there a few weeks ago, right?
And beautiful hills, literally on the doorstep of the city.
Actually, that's interesting. We name our chemistry after the peaks in the Peak District. A little nod to the local flavor. But Sheffield is a blue-collar town, but there's a real university town. There's over 55,000 students there. We have great access to young, upcoming talent there, engineering talent. And I think Sheffield really has the opportunity to be really a battery innovation center for us. And that's what we're looking to do.
Do these sodium-ion batteries improve our energy security as Westerners, as Brits, as Americans? Do they improve our ability to not have to rely on parts of the world that are politically really troublesome?
Absolutely. I mean, look what's happening in the world right now with Russia and Ukraine. That's drove the price of nickel up. China controls 75–80% of the world manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries. They control 65% of the world graphite supply. They have 30 times the amount of lithium reserves compared to the U.S. if you're building lithium in the UK or in Europe, you're depending on the material supply chain from China. And lithium comes from 2 or 3 countries. It's limited. It's mined, takes 2.2 million liters of water to produce 1 ton. So sodium ion is indigenous. It's table salt, basically. It's sodium chloride. It's available in most every region. The cathode is a hard carbon. It's made from coconut shells. So we're not limited. It's a more sustainable technology. So from an energy security standpoint, it enables you to have economic security, environmental security, and I believe national security. And we're seeing what's happening in Taiwan right now with China as well. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And sodium ion gives the energy supply chain a little bit more certainty.
Well, James, we focus a lot on energy issues here on The Money. It's been great talking to you. I've learned a lot, and I'm grateful that you came into the studio. James Quinn of Feredian.
Thank you so much.
Makers of sodium-ion batteries, not least in Sheffield in Yorkshire. That's all we've got time for today. I'm back same time, same place tomorrow here on The Money, helping you to beat the squeeze. But for now, this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello, it's going to turn fine and dry across the bulk of the UK in the next couple of days. There will be some rain in the northwest through Thursday, but elsewhere it'll be fine, dry and turn increasingly hot and humid. If we look at the pressure pattern then through the rest of Thursday, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. And as we head into Thursday into Friday, we start to drag in a more southerly airflow, and that's really going to lift those temperatures. So I think Friday will be the peak of the heat, where we can see temperatures in the low to locally mid-30s. Back to Thursday afternoon, then you can see some rain towards the north and the west, affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Aberdeenshire. But elsewhere across the bulk of England, Wales, Northern England as well, it'll be fine and dry. Variable amounts of cloud at times in the west, but still plenty of sunshine to come. And in that southeast corner, look at these temperatures. We could see highs of 29 or 30 degrees. That would make it the warmest day of the year so far. Still cooler, though, towards the north and the west. As we head through the rest of Thursday into the evening and overnight, then you can see heavy, more persistent rain spreading in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So turning quite wet here, some strong winds developing as well. But elsewhere across the bulk of England and Wales, it'll be another dry night, variable amounts of cloud and a warm and muggy night to come, particularly in the south, where we can see lows just falling to 19 or 20 degrees, a little bit cooler further towards the north. As we look into Friday, then you can see that heavy rain still affecting much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, continuing for much of the day, slowly pushing its way southwards as we head through the day. But elsewhere across England and Wales, look at this, fine, dry, plenty of sunshine, and with those southerly winds that I mentioned, temperatures really will lift. So probably the peak of the heat, like I said, we could see widely temperatures across England and Wales into the low 30s, but in the southeast corner, 33 or 34 degrees, quite exceptional for the time of the year. Once again, cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we head through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight. That cold front will slowly sink its way southwards, affecting Northern England, Northern Wales by the end of the night. To the north of it, it will be cooler and fresher, but again, another warm, muggy night across England and Wales. Quite uncomfortable for sleeping, I think. Gradually, it will turn more unsettled as we head into the weekend. We will